The following letter from Mr. Knill to my grandfather is very interesting, as showing how the good man thought of the matter. Chester, the 17th of April, 1855. Reverend Mr. Spurgeon, dear sir, perhaps you have forgotten me, but I have not forgotten my visit to you and your ancient chapel, and the fine trees which surround it, and your garden with the box and yew trees, and your dear grandson, with whom I conversed, and on whose head I placed my hand when I prayed with him at the arbour. 2 years ago he wrote to me, reminding me of these things, and of his warm feelings on the occasion. Last week I was at Leamington and dined with a young artist who had come from London to see his parents. His conversation was much about a popular young minister from the country, whom he had heard preach at Exeter Hall, whose name was Spurgeon. I said, I knew him. How is it possible? Said the gentleman. I told him of my visit, and of your grandson's letter to me, and of his preaching to John Berridge's people at Waterbeach, near Cambridge. Oh, it was a fine season of interest and rejoicing. I hardly slept the following night for joy. A day or two afterwards, I dined near Warwick with a party of friends. Their conversation was also about your grandson, not knowing that I had heard of him. Two of the party had been his hearers in London, and they were very full of the subject. One of them said, he mentioned your praying with him at his relatives in the garden. I have prayed much for him and about him, that God may keep him at the foot of the cross, that popularity may not puff him up. Will you please give me his address, as I should like to write to him? Forgive me for this intrusion. I feel much about this dear youth, very much. I have 4 or 5 of our ministers in London, and my heart goes out much after them. I have been settled in the city upwards of 7 years, and have received more than 400 members into the church. Matthew Henry's chapel is still standing, but is in the possession of the Unitarians. Ours is an offshoot from some of Matthew's old members who would have orthodox preaching. The Lord bless you and all your family. I have a distant recollection of seeing some of them at your home. Yours very truly, Richard Knill. After that, I went to preach for Mr. Knill himself, who was then at Chester. What a meeting we had! He was preaching in the theatre, and consequently I had to take his place at the footlights. His preaching in a theatre took away from me all fear about preaching in buildings of doubtful use, and set me free for the campaigns in Exeter Hall and the Surrey Music Hall. How much this had to do with other theatre services, many know. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. After more than 40 years of the Lord's loving kindness, I sat again in the arbour in the year 1887. No doubt it is a mere trifle for outsiders to hear about, but to me it was an overwhelming moment. In July of the year 1887, I went down to Stambourne and walked about the place like one in a dream. The present minister of Stambourne Meeting House and the members of his family, including his son and his grandchildren, were in the garden, and I could not help calling them together around that arbour, while I praised the Lord for his goodness to me. One irresistible impulse was upon me. It was to pray God to bless those lads that stood around me. Memory begat prayer. He who had blessed me would bless others also. I wanted the lads to remember, when they grew up, my testimony of God's goodness to me. God has blessed me all my life long and redeemed me from all evil. And I pray that he may be the God of all the young people who read this story. The following is the letter mentioned by Mr. Knill on page 35. Number 9 Union Road, Cambridge, February the 7th, 53. Reverend R. Knill. My dear Sir, I feel confident that you will pardon the liberty I take when you read the occasion of it. I have for some time wished to write to you, but could not find you out, until in the Banner I observed a notice of your preaching at the theatre of Chester. 8 or 9 years ago, you were travelling as a deputation from the London Missionary Society in the country of Essex. Among other places, you preached at the village of Stambourne. I was then a little boy, staying at my grandfather's, Reverend James Spurgeon. You kindly noticed me. I read at family prayer. You took me by your side and talked to me in a very affectionate manner. You told me a tale of a little boy in Colchester. We went into an arbour in the garden. There you asked me to sing, and I joined in as well as I could. I shall never forget the way in which you tried to lead me to the Saviour. Your conversation and spirit were all a father's could have been, and that one interview made my heart yours. My eyes rejoice to see your name, and the mention of it brings up emotions of gratitude, in fact, unknown to you. A few words you then spoke have been a sort of star to my existence. And my friends, look on them with half the reverence of prophecy. You meant them not perhaps to last so long, but now they are imperishable. They were to this effect, and were heard by more than one. I think this little man will one day be a preacher of the gospel, and I hope a successful one. I think you will preach at Rowland Hill's Chapel, and when you do, tell the people this verse: God moves in a mysterious way, etc. You told me to learn the hymn, and said it seemed perhaps unlikely, but Providence had wrought wonders, and you thought it would be so. This is often mentioned by my grandfather, and somehow, though I am far enough from being superstitious, it holds me fast, and I do confidently, and yet somehow and paradoxically, distrustfully look forward to the time when the whole thing shall come to pass.